the ability to press pause and meet the player where they're at in that moment, like you have to do that very quickly. It's no different than how we manage the cage, right? You have a kid, 22-year-old rookie, first time in the big leagues, and then the next guy in the cage is Rafael Devers, right? And you have to be able to flip the switch quickly and understand where that player is at, what they need. Those things don't really change from those two environments as much as I think we like to think they change.
That's Pete Fatse, the current hitting coach for the Boston Red Sox. He climbed the ranks quickly and has been coaching at the top of the sport for years. In this episode, Amon Lumba, GameChanger's SVP of Product, and Alex Trezza, Senior Manager of Baseball, go deep with Pete on what he's learned throughout his coaching career and why youth baseball and the big leagues might have more in common than you think. They explore how tech can provide an objective lens and why instincts, empathy, and trust are just as essential to player development at every level of the game. This is Athletic Intelligence from GameChanger, a show where we go deep inside the world of baseball and softball, uncovering the tech that's shaping the game.
Before we dive into this episode, it'll become pretty clear that Pete and I go way back. We met competing against each other in indie ball in the Can-Am League, where we also played against previous guests, Chris and Bobby from Pelotero.
Pete's ball career began at the University of Connecticut under coach Jem Penders. Penders is a 5-time Coach of the Year, now entering his 22nd season as head coach. One of the most respected leaders in college baseball, Penders has helped build the Huskies into a national force.
Coach Penders really sold me on this idea of being part of something bigger than yourself and an opportunity to contribute to a program moving forward, chance to compete. And I thought that my personal value system, my family's value system really aligned with Coach. And it was the place I wanted to be since day one. I'd visited the campus quite a bit. And again, the culture for me was the most important piece. So then going there, I was fortunate to start all 3 years. I learned a lot through the process, through summer baseball, getting exposure to different coaches, playing with kids throughout the country. I learned a lot about myself in a very short period of time. I actually think when we talked about our hockey careers coming up, Trez, I felt like hockey was probably what prepared me the most for college baseball in preparation for kind of the grind. I learned to take care of my body, what it meant to prepare physically and mentally. And I just think, my career was just, in college specifically, was just, I wanted to win every game. I took a lot of pride in competing, and I wanted to put myself in the best possible position to help the team win, whatever that meant. So, I was fortunate to get drafted by the Brewers in 2009.
Pete played a few years in the minor leagues before being released. He then signed with an independent ball club with hopes of earning another affiliate contract. Here he met other players who shared his mindset, guys who cared deeply about the craft, about getting better, and about rethinking what player development could look like. These conversations would go on to shape the way he approaches coaching to this day.
It was this constant pursuit of trying to learn, taking as much information as possible. And then the application to my own swing, I felt like I was learning more about myself, but also I was just observing more. I was seeing things I never really saw before. And that kind of opened my eyes to probably the broader coaching lens. And then I got to this point after a few years of independent ball where I started to get more gratification in the off seasons coaching and giving my information back and seeing players kind of evolve. That started to trigger me more than when I would get a hit. I love the game, and I felt like impacting others and using the potential gifts I had as a coach was probably best suited for me.
What's really cool is that the longer we played, the more we were in coaching mode while we were playing, right? Because not that we saw the end in sight, but we knew we were going to do something other than playing soon, right? And we were honing our craft as coaches and players at the same time, which especially in independent ball, you get to do, right? You're trying to figure it out. We're in the cage before the game. Even as opponents, right? We played against each other. We're taking swings and kind of riffing on hey, what worked for you? What are you feeling? What'd you work on this offseason?
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, I think it's the one thing, I think we as coaches, this is more of a broader concept, but I think we're really responsible for the environment and the information that we give players. And the cool thing about what you said was we were constantly coaching each other as much as we were coaching ourselves or working through our own feels. I use the term observation a lot. And that's something I think really good offenses in general, if we're talking about the team level, right? You're paying attention to the things going on around you, whether that's the game state, whether that's somebody's swing, You're just constantly observing and then constantly communicating. And I think that's ultimately the most effective style of coaching or environment that we can create.
After his time in independent ball, Pete stepped off the field and into coaching, opening his own training academy in Western Massachusetts. From day one, tech played a central role. He used tools like bat sensors and video analysis as a way to give players real, objective, actionable feedback.
I certainly think technology obviously has allowed us to move forward and objectively assess faster. I remember the first purchase I made, and because at the time it felt like jumping off a cliff, right? I bought a 2-camera Right View Pro system. It was on this wheeled cart. It was like two of these like cameras, and you're doing side by sides. And Right View Pro at the time had that you could compare your swing to like major leaguers. So I remember when I first started the academy, my thought was like, I want to start to create as much objective feedback for players as possible. And early on, I remember like the first sensors we ever used was like the ZEP sensor, right? It was just giving us some basic bat metrics, bat speed. And then I remember what I would consider my second largest purchase was when I got a HitTrax. And that's when, I think we were one of the first 200 units to be sold. And I remember at the time, one of my business partners asking me, how is this going to generate revenue? And I was like, not that I didn't care, but my thought was we need to stay ahead of the technology infrastructure. Like we have to be able to continue to provide objective information, track if our players are getting better, because that's ultimately what our business is we want to help these kids develop. We want to give these kids tools throughout the course of their career, and honestly, things that they can carry over after their baseball playing days are over. And I think that's ultimately what led to what I felt like were some good results. I mean, we were able to take Western Massachusetts has never really been a major baseball hotbed, and I'm really proud of the players and the families that came through and trusted us. And then, as you know, that kind of spreads. And the next thing, we were working at the time with a college summer baseball program. I was on the hitting staff there, and we would have kids from all over the country come in and work at the facility on game days. And then that transcended into they were started to fly back with friends in the off season. That's kind of how some of the remote clientele began to build.
Who were the players, especially at the beginning, who started at the academy? Like what kind of ages were you coaching, and sort of what level of play were these players playing at?
So when we began, it was everybody. That's probably been the most important part of my journey. Like if it was a 10-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid coming in at the very base level of their development, and obviously what we were doing with them was very different than what we would do with our high school population. We had a high school academy where obviously there were summer prep programs that we would run, but our off seasons were more geared towards, if you're a part of our academy, you had open access to the cages. There were structured twice a week hitting development sessions, and you'd also have 2 to 3 times of S&C. During the morning sessions, we would have a lot. That's when our professional hitters would come in.
At his facility, Pete was coaching players across all age levels and experience. His approach had multiple layers, and one of those, as we heard, is S&C, short for strength and conditioning.
Let's go. Drive through.
It's the off-field work that helps build a well-rounded player. Strength, mobility, recovery. But for Pete, building a complete player wasn't just about what happened in the weight room or the cage. It was about knowing the person in front of him. And over time, he found that certain tools could help him do that more objectively. So Aman asked him,
You mentioned that you thought the technology was an important part of the coaching process because it allowed you to gather objective information. Is that the same philosophy that you would have had in the era before the technology? Is it really just about observation of the player?
Well, I think before some of this technology came into existence, and I still think this is very true, I go back to the observation. Like our eyes were the most important piece, right? So if Trez was watching me hit in the cage, what he sees is kind of what we would use to validate, hey, your hands are coming forward a little bit, or you're sliding forward off your backside. Obviously, I trusted guys like Trez to give me feedback, and I would have to, work off of my feels that way. I remember being in college, we would use a video system and we would record swings. But to be honest, I really didn't know what I was looking at. So I think the way technology has evolved is it's kind of created a value system of checks and balances. So now we can more objectively say you're under rotated with your hips, or you're over rotated with your torso. You can more objectively measure these things, But the key is in the feedback that you give. It's one thing to have the information and to have the data, but it's how that resonates with the player and the cueing process that separates what I feel like really efficient coaching, because you have to know what type of feedback resonates with each guy. There are some guys that really embrace the data and technology, and there's some guys that just need a feel or an external thought, which is obviously the best way to go. So it's how you take the bits of information that you have and deliver that to the player that I think separates, I guess, coaching strategy.
Yeah, and to be clear, I didn't give him any tips about his swing that would help him until after the final game of the series, because I didn't want him to beat us at all. So
Yes.
I never really told you that, Pete, but I would give you fake tips during the series and then the real tips on the way out.
That's good. That's good.
That approach, blending instinct with information, became Pete's signature. Beyond helping hitters develop their mechanics, it helped them think differently about the game. By the time he joined the Red Sox, his toolkit had expanded, not just in terms of tech, but in how to use it strategically.
As much as it is about the mechanics and the mechanical interventions and stuff, a lot of the data, the pitch data, is really important to me in how we observe opposing pitchers, tendencies, things like that help shape the game plan. Because at the end of the day, it's about execution, right? We have to go out and we have to try and beat a starter. We have to have a process for how we want to attack each bullpen arm. And that can be individualized based on the routine or the role that player has in the team. Like if there's a high leverage lefty matchup and there's something that we think we can exploit, like data and technology helps us with that as well. But I think what technology and our systems have allowed me and my staff to do is, especially in game, right? Like your eyes are the most important feature. And if you think you see something, one of the habits that I have right now, I carry a notebook every single day. And I write notes constantly. So if I see something that comes up or I see something that on video in the middle of the game that I feel like, maybe somebody's hips aren't loading the same way, I'll make a note, cross-reference that with our S&C. Hey, I think there might be some restrictions going on here. Tell me what you guys are seeing in the weight room, if there's been any modifications. Then I'll follow that up with a lot of our sports science or systems that we have. And I'll put together, maybe it's comparative views of, okay, the last 10 days versus maybe this guy was hot for 3 weeks, and I'll look and just validate what my eyes are seeing. And if, typically those things line up, right? But if they don't, that's when we have to create an action plan. And it goes back to, okay, well, what drills, what fields do we know this guy needs? And then how do we want to solve the problem? Like I said, I think the most important piece and the most effective thing that we've done is create processes. We have, 13, 14 hitters at a time. We have 13, 14 processes. Right. And then we kind of divide and conquer amongst the staff. But at the end of the day, we're trying to create a uniform message for this is the most important thing for this player at this moment. So the technology really helps me just kind of reinforce or reaffirm what my eyes are seeing, what our eyes are seeing.
How do you get to know? You said, 10 different players might have 10 different plans.
Yeah.
How do you get to know someone? Is there a process for getting to understand them so you can start working on a plan that works for them individually?
Yeah, 100%. That's where spring training is extremely valuable. Trez can speak to this, obviously, as a player too, but I ask a lot of questions. I spend a lot of time observing, and that's part of the relationship building. There's no substitute for good relationships, in my opinion, as a coach. I think you really have to understand what makes a player tick, and then you ask a lot of questions. When a guy takes a certain swing or has a certain miss that you see, hey, what do you feel there? Tell me about what you feel. And again, you're constantly, I think early on in your when you're building relationships, you're asking a lot of questions. And you're going to get a lot of answers that kind of reveal thought processes. And then from there, you start to understand how a player thinks about what they're doing. And that's where you have an opportunity to impact with, like I said, with cueing and different coaching strategies. But it really starts with listening and asking a lot of really good questions.
All the data in the world doesn't matter if a player can't do anything with it. That's where cueing comes in. The way a coach translates information into something a player can actually feel and apply to their swing. And sometimes the most effective cues aren't complex at all. They're short and simple phrases that stick.
So a cue is basically like a coaching phrase. So something you would say like, hey, but you need to go forward more. Or, hey, you're missing underneath. You need to be more direct. Aim for the top of the ball. It's a directive that a coach would give to achieve something. And again, sometimes it can be very specific, like your hands need to go up and back. Other times it may be the external component, which would be something, focusing more out towards the field. Like, hey, I want you to think about as a lefty, hitting a low line drive at the shortstop's shoes, because this guy's fastball really takes off. And if you try and get underneath him to hit the ball in the air, you're going to miss underneath by a baseball. So you need to think about trying to stay on top and hit a low line drive. So those would kind of be bucketed into more like an external cue, which is the objective out in front of you. And then the internal cue would be something more generated towards your body.
Yeah, for me, like I remember in college, we had a hitting coach and he just used to say, Trez, stay tall. Like it was very simple, right? It was just like stay tall through my swing. Like no one really knew what it meant, but I knew what it meant and how it made me feel. So like these little tiny things that coaches say. And I think, Pete, and you can hit on this too, as a extension of this question, but it's like that trust factor, like the person, when you look down at them in the box, right? Or in the dugout, the trust factor of like looking in your eyes and him knowing that what you say is only meant to help him. And I really know what you're feeling and how to make you feel better. Talk about the trust factor, because that's, you talk about relationships, which is an extension of that, but the trust thing for me was huge. I've had coaches that said the right cue and it doesn't sound the same, right? As the guy put his arm around me, on the couch in the clubhouse at 2 a.m. after a struggling game.
Yeah. Well, the trust piece for me comes down to like when you're at your academy, players are coming to you because they think you're good at what you do and you can help them. So there's an inherent buy-in because they're coming to you and they're seeking you out, right? But as a professional coach, a major league coach, you're inheriting players. These players have taken hundreds of thousands of swings before they get to you. It's your job to understand those swings before you make suggestions. So like I spend a lot of time before we acquire a player. I even spend time when we have pre-existing players, like studying their old habits, their old moves, because players can sniff out when you're not prepared, or players can sniff out if you're just throwing something to the wind because like, I don't really know what's going on. So I try and be very intentional with the information that I give. And I think that inherently helps buy-in and trust, because players need to know that you are in the fight with them. You're there for them to vent when they're feeling terrible. You're there to celebrate when it's good. But I think you have to appreciate both ends of the spectrum. It's also something that doesn't happen overnight too, right? Like I think really good coaches ask other coaches really good questions too. You can't be afraid to feel like you're vulnerable in that way. Like, hey, I've had this problem before. Like, how have you helped guys with similar issues get out of this?
I was just going to hit on that too. Like, I think it's okay, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I know I've done this as a coach, to say like, I don't know.
Yep.
I'm looking at it. It looks good. Like, I don't know. Let me talk to someone else on the staff, or maybe they have some nugget of information that I'm not seeing. I'm around you every day. Maybe we're just missing it. It's okay to say that, right? And I actually feel like that breeds even more trust, because they know you're not just making something up.
100%, like 100%. And I think too, it's important to understand when you don't know. And even when you have all the information, the data, like, you know what I mean? You might feel like but it is okay to admit, I guess maybe admit's the wrong word, but acknowledge like, hey, I'm going to think on this and I'm going to get back to you with a really good answer.
This process seems so based around, empathy and really getting to know the player you're trying to coach. Does the technology or even just having the data in general ever get in the way of that? Does it sometimes make it harder to make a relationship with somebody?
I would say no. I think the technology enhances the way and the information enhances the relationship, because there's objective truth too, right? Like at the end of the day, you may feel certain things, you may think certain things. And I think what the data has really done for me, it just creates kind of a goalpost for us, like this is what we're working towards. And are we achieving it or are we not? And can we hold ourselves accountable to those things? Because otherwise, as players, you can kind of chase the ghost a little bit. One day it might be your hips, and one day it might be your hands, and one day it's your path, and then it's your time. And it's, yes, all those things are extremely important, but what are we trying to achieve? Like, you have to have that established so that you have a point of reference throughout the season.
Great coaching goes beyond the data. It's about understanding the player, how they think, how they learn, and what makes them tick. That takes empathy, trust, and above all, curiosity. And that means asking questions to help uncover a player's true strengths.
Why are you a big leaguer? You're a big leaguer because you do X, Y, and Z really, really well. Now, how do we tap into those things to continue to drive value? Your value to the organization, to baseball, to winning baseball games. How can we build a process for you to kind of manage your current role? Understanding that we're trying to drive as much value for the player as possible over time.
You might think that the hardest part of playing the game of baseball is hitting a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, or tracking a slider that disappears at the last second. Or maybe it's the grind, the weight room, the travel, the back-to-back games. But the truth is, baseball is a deeply emotional game, and for many players, that's the hardest part. Managing the pressure, the doubt, the failure, it can all get in the way.
Like, this game is so emotional because, to your point, you can do everything right and you score 1 run, right? Because you lined out 4 times, runners in scoring position. You can hit a bunch of flares, 7 flares, score 5 runs, and it's like, yep, okay, we accomplished the task today. And that's one thing I've continued to work on over my career, is like managing the emotional responses. Like, when is it time to be upset? Or like, hey, we need to really make a change here, versus like, hey, this is a tough game. We have to continue with our processes that we believe in. And I think that speaks to the players as well, right? Like, the game is so emotional because we play 162 dates plus the playoffs. You're getting 600 plate appearances. Managing emotions throughout the course of a season is really important. And obviously, like, it's harder when you're in high school and you play 20 games. So it's like every game feels like the World Series, but emotional response is a really important thing for me.
Sounds like you do some amount of emotional coaching for your players as well. Does an organization
and myself, emotional and myself, yes.
Just keep yourself on the level. Does an organization like the Red Sox also give any like psychological coaching to their players?
Yeah, we have a really great staff. I mean, we've been fortunate to have mental skills coaches in the dugout. They empower us and give us resources so that not only we're the ones that are closest to the action of the player, and players are really, we're in the fight with these guys, giving us the tools to help manage the processes. They've been great in terms of like giving us strategy. Some players have external resources, and like another big part of my job is kind of connecting with let's call it the team outside the team, the people that impact these guys, whether it's a private hitting coach, mental skills coach, so that I can be more equipped to help these guys. So I think it's the infrastructure that we have, but it's also kind of getting involved as much as the player feels comfortable with their own external team.
The emotional side of the game doesn't exist in a vacuum. It lives alongside all the data, all the tools, and all the pressure to perform. And with so much information now at the player's fingertips, the real challenge and the real opportunity is knowing how to use it.
Over the last 5 years specifically, there's been so many new products in the industry that we've been exposed to. I really think the game is a pendulum for me. It swings one way, it swings back. I personally think there's so many tech advancements. We know more about the swing, the body. We're able to analyze opposing starters. We can just do so many things that I think the pendulum is swinging back to the communication and how you drive change with your players. Not necessarily the soft skills, although a lot of it is soft skills, but I think it's, okay, who can make the most of the current information right now has the competitive advantage. I talk to people across the league, and it's like we all have access to a lot of the same things. But I think what drives change is your ability to identify what the most important lever is to pull, and then being able to get the player to understand that through your relationship, through buy-in, through objective processes, and then work on course correction from there. I really think it's like we've reached this point of like, and saturation is not the right word, but we have so much available to us. It's about distilling it down to the most important piece for that player with an objective benchmark that we're trying to hit. And then how we attack those goals is like the most important.
So much of what we've heard today goes beyond the big leagues, and maybe matters just as much on the youth field. Beyond his work with the Red Sox, Pete also coaches his 8-year-old son, who plays on both 9U and 10U teams. And working with kids has only sharpened his perspective on what really matters.
It's funny because everybody asks me about how I coach my son. I'm trying to encourage him to learn as much as possible. I use a very simple cue with him. It's always about being ready to hit. I don't want to say swing at everything, but I want him to learn what pitches he can and can't hit. My whole thing has just been getting him to fall in love with baseball. I just want him to love every facet, kind of be a sponge, enjoy watching the game. And I think early on, when kids observe more and they see things and they watch their favorite players, I always joke about, these kids that wear, he's got the elbow guard and the shin, like he's got all that stuff, right? And some people are like, oh man, he's got all the swag. And I'm like, well, he's just really paying attention. He sees Trevor Story, who he loves, right? He's like his idol. He's trying to emulate the things that they do because he's really invested in paying attention. Now, whether that's a leg guard or their stance or whatever, like I I just really encourage his curiosity. I try not to overcoach him. I try and give him simple cues. I also think that baseball is something that, especially with all the failure, you have to love, Trez. I feel like that's really important. Like you have to really love it, and you got to love the good and the bad, and you got to love the struggle and the grind. And I think at a young age, the more you can encourage players to observe and watch the game and learn, and fall in love with the game, I think that's ultimately at a young age what feeds kind of those middle tiers of development when you're 12 to 14 and you're transitioning to bigger fields and more competition, just trying to foster the love for the game.
Fostering a love of the game is something that needs to persist at every level of baseball. But what might surprise you is how many lessons Pete has learned from coaching 10-year-olds that apply just as much to big leaguers. It turns out they're not so different after all.
A lot of the things in the way I try and influence our players really is actually extremely similar to players that are just beginning their careers. Like patience is one for me that's really important. When you're dealing with a 10-year-old, you have to be patient, right? These kids they're at the beginning of their journey. They're learning a lot. We want to solve all these problems, but the reality is there's a lot of self-understanding. Like these kids have to learn themselves. They have to learn the game, right? I think about my son. Patience is really important when you're, thinking about how that replicates with like a big leaguer. These guys have taken, like I said, 100,000 swings without you. You have to be patient in terms of the process to learn how you can influence maybe the next 10,000 that they take. Being deliberate is really important. Like if I want to talk to a 10-year-old, I need to explicitly tell them in the simplest form the things that I want them to achieve. Again, with these big leaguers, these super athletic profiles, elite engines, I need to be very deliberate with the information that I want to give. What it really comes down to is you're operating at both ends of the spectrum, but the way what you're trying to elicit is very, very similar. The other one was managing emotions. Like young kids get really frustrated really quick. A lot of big leaguers get really frustrated really quick too. So how do we manage the emotional space, right? And I think some of that is just knowing when to step back and call a time and say, hey, look it. Number one, are you having fun? You're enjoying what you do, right? You like to compete. How do we slow this whole thing down for you in the moment to get you to execute whatever it is? Maybe the 10-year-old is really upset and starts to cry when they get out, right? Like big leaguer isn't necessarily crying, but inside they're really frustrated. So how do we manage the emotional response? I think communication kind of falls into that bucket as well. But I think just sometimes people think that those two groups are so far apart when in reality, there's a lot of simple elements to coaching that are effective to both groups. For me, having been able to coach 8 and 10-year-olds, when you're doing 50 hours a week in the cage, you get a 10-year-old at 4 o'clock, and then you have an elite high school prospect at 5 o'clock. The ability to press pause and meet the player where they're at in that moment, you have to do that very quickly. It's no different than how we manage the cage, right? You have a kid, 22-year-old rookie, first time in the big leagues, and then the next guy in the cage is Rafael Devers, right? And you have to be able to flip the switch quickly and understand where that player is at, what they need. Those things don't really change from those two environments as much as I think we like to think they change.
For youth coaches, parents, the dad who got suckered into coaching his kid's little league team, who go out there and they look at all the tech that's available and they're just wondering where to start. What would you tell them? What should a new, youth coach focus on?
Yeah, I would say the place to start, if you are going to invest in some sort of technology, I think one, there's no substitute for having the ability to watch yourself. I still think watching. So being able to reflect on a game, if you can go back and you have the ability to record a game and hey, let's watch your bat here. I used this with my son yesterday. I'm talking about timing and hey, when are you going to be on time? I use the GameChanger app with him. We rewatch some of the at-bats and I'm hey, look where the ball is when it's coming out of the pitcher's hand. You still haven't moved yet. That means you're late. We literally just walked through and I said, hey, look at the ball's out of his hand and you haven't gotten started yet. Let's start from there. So reflection is really important. But if you're talking about one piece of technology, I think a bat sensor is a really easy place to start. You can get a blast bat sensor, put it on your knob. Hey, I feel like I'm missing under a lot of pitches. Well, let's just look at your attack angle really quick. Or, maybe it's the kid that's hey, I want to learn to swing the bat faster, right? Okay, let's work on swinging your bat faster. What are you doing to help you do that? And then can we just see, I'm on the balls that I hit really well, I notice my bat speed is X, Y, or Z. I notice when I try and swing too hard, my bat speed's here, but I'm not hitting the ball well, and just start to correlate where the player is relative to some of that objective information. That's just a really easy place to start. And I think by now too, the third would be, hit tracks is great. Like the launch monitors are great. I think there's no substitute for understanding what a good line drive is in the cage, right? So when I go to the field with my dad and I'm hitting, like, I know this is where I want the ball to go, right? So it's like just understanding why the ball flight's important is a reasonable place to start.
So looking ahead for you, where do you think the biggest gains in a player's development will come from? And do you think it's like tech or something else, or kind of a mix of the tech and maybe strength and conditioning, or just the level of play? And talk about where do you see the biggest gains coming in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think my reference is more to what I'm seeing at the big league level. Like, these kids are coming up and they are so athletic and strong and fast. I think about this with my son and my daughter a lot. It's preparing to maximize your body as best as you can, taking care of your body, learning, I think, at an appropriate age, how to get involved with strength and conditioning, how to prioritize moving explosively and fast. Spending time understanding how valuable that is will set you up for your more advanced amateur stages when, because there's, young kids right now that are dragging the bat and they want to go fix their swing. And I look at it as, this kid is 8 years old and weighs 60 pounds and the bat's swinging him, right? So it's like understanding when the physical development needs to happen and then when to advance the physical development. Because like I said, a lot of these kids are coming to the big leagues with, advanced swings and they've been exposed to a lot of this technology for a while. I see the biggest gains with the physical development space, right? Like, there's just building the best engine that you can. And if we're referencing like high schoolers, like spending time getting in the weight room, I think is an important thing, and just understanding your body. I think that's a really important facet of development. And I think like we typically see that with kids that go from high school to college, right? Maybe a kid's never really had a formal development plan physically, and they get to college and all of a sudden they're moving the bat faster, hitting the ball harder by nature of they're just getting stronger and in the weight room more. So I think like any way to advance that is probably your best bet.
As we've heard throughout this season so far, and in today's conversation with Pete, tech is just one piece of the puzzle in baseball and softball. It gives players an objective lens, a way to see their game more clearly. But to actually create change, it has to be paired with emotional intelligence, trust, and empathy. And that applies at every level, from the big leagues to the backyard. The real value of tech comes when it helps players and coaches better understand the game and each other. This has been Athletic Intelligence from GameChanger. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, rate, and share it. I hope you'll join us next time as we uncover the tech that's shaping the game.